All right, good evening and welcome to the City of Sunbury Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. It is July 22nd, 2024. It's 6:30 p.m. Would you please join me in a moment of silent prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Mayor St. John,
Here.
Mr. Gokenhour.
Here.
Mrs. Miller.
Here.
Mr. Grumney.
Here.
Mrs. Crawford.
Here.
Mr. Soderman.
Here.
6 present, we have quorum.
Thank you. We will start with a public hearing where we are considering a conditional use and a rezoning application, both of which for 801 West Cherry Street. I would like to begin by opening this public hearing and handing it to our Director of Law for this evening, Mr. Whitney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Good evening, commission members and public. So yes, I am the attorney representing the commission here tonight. As the mayor indicated, first thing on the agenda will be this public hearing on the applications of NWB Properties LLC for a conditional use as well as for rezoning. So as you can see, we have a stenographer here who is taking down everything being recorded. We're making a record of tonight's public hearing. So to the extent anyone believes that they may wish to give testimony tonight or speak on either one of these items, the conditional use application or the rezoning application of NWB Properties. In a moment, we'll have you stand up and the stenographer will swear you in because like I said, to the extent you want to speak, we are on the record. It is a hearing, so the testimony will be sworn that we give tonight. If you do wish to speak, the mayor will direct you at the appropriate time to come up to the lectern to speak there. There is a microphone, so please speak slowly and clearly and loudly into the microphone so the stenographer can hear you as well as everybody else. If the commission has questions for you, let them ask the question before you respond. It's much easier for the stenographer if she's only taking down one person speaking at any given time. Give your full name and your address right off the jump when you come up to the lectern. That way we know who you are and we can find you later if we need to. So with that, anyone, including the applicant who will be speaking or thinks they might speak tonight on either one of these applications, if you please stand right now and the stenographer will swear you in.
If you stand and raise your right hand, please, if you'd like to be sworn in. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you will present will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
And Mr. Mayor, before I kick it back to you, if I could move to admit exhibits here on these public hearings.
Sure.
So I've got a document marked as Exhibit A. It's a 5-page document, which includes the application for conditional use, as well as submittal documents related to that application, including a plan that was submitted and the legal description. I've got Exhibit B, which is also a 5-page document, which is the rezoning application submitted by the applicant. Also includes a copy of the legal description as well as plans submitted and a narrative for the rezoning application. And there is a narrative actually with the Exhibit A as well as one of those pages. Exhibit C is a 5-page document which consists of both public notices, one for the conditional use application and one for the rezoning application that were posted as well as mailed to the appropriate parties. In that document, Exhibit C also has proof of mailing to the affected property owners. Exhibit D is a 3-page document that was submitted by the applicant that is just pages 13, 14, and 15 of the Village of Sunbury Comprehensive Plan. And Exhibit E is a 3-page document, which is the memorandum of the Planning and Zoning Commission. So with that, I would move to admit those into the record.
You're admitted. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, in the order of operations, Mr. Blankenship, it states that our staff report is to be the first item covered. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Do you want to direct us through the staff report?
Alyssa will take that.
Oh, listen.
But the applicant is requesting a conditional use while simultaneously requesting a rezoning of 801 West Cherry Street. The parcel is currently zoned as industrial and the request is to change the zoning to C2 Commercial District. The conditional use would allow the prospective medical office suite tenant to occupy the space while they continue on with the rezoning process. The parcel has always been zoned industrial. The use of this building has been office space for over 20 years. The applicant has a tenant that is interested in the space, and the reason they're applying for the conditional use is to comply with the timeline of the proposed medical office suite tenant. The proposed tenant would like to be in the office space by October, and we wouldn't be able to reach that deadline if they had just applied for the rezoning. The rezoning application is so the property is more consistent with its intended use. And the applicant also included excerpts from the 2016 comprehensive plan that shows the sub area where the parcel is located as an area for planned commercial development. And to quote the plan, it says, "The plan recommends planned commercial development to a depth of approximately 700 feet parallel to the north and south sides of US 3637. And then there is also figure 2 references that page in the comprehensive plan.
Thank you. Great update. All right, is there anyone from the applicant that would like to speak with the commission? Come on up, sir, and if you don't mind, state your name.
Good evening. My name is Douglas Smith. My address is 356 Trace Drive, Delaware, Ohio, 43015. I'm the listing agent for the property. I'm representing the owner, Michael Hajar, who has NWB Properties. I think you covered a lot of the material. I just want to give a brief background of the property and why we're looking for a rezoning today. As mentioned, the property was built in 1998 by Oberfields, and that was for their office and sat adjacent to their construction product yards that was immediately north of their property. Right around 2002, the property was sold. And as noted, with Oberfields, the office and the construction products yard was zoned industrial. In 2002, Oberfield sold the property to Michael Kaiser, who maintained the building as an office and actually had several tenants in the building. And he did that for about 20 years. And then subsequent owners were AZM and now NWB Properties that have also used the building as an office. So our request is for a rezoning from industrial to C2, as mentioned. Also, as mentioned, we have a Central Ohio healthcare provider that wants to occupy the ground floor, which will be urgent and primary care. As mentioned, the rezoning aligns with the Sunbury Master Plan, and the intent would be that the first floor would be inhabited by this health provider, and then the second floor would also be leased out at some point to a tenant to be determined, but it would also be office use. The owner has no intention of the building being anything but office at this point. And as previously stated, the intent here is to get started on the permit process and ultimately the construction process so we can get the tenant started while the rezoning process is being worked through. Any questions?
I think you explained it clearly. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
All right, we'd like to open it up to public comment. Again, this is related to the conditional use for 801 West Cherry Street and the rezoning application for 801 West Cherry Street. Does anybody from the public wish to speak on or behalf of this project? All right, I'd like to open it up to the commission for any questions or comments of the applicant.
I just had one question. Thank you, Mayor. So commercial obviously makes sense, and I understand the medical, and then to be determined on the second floor. Right, when I hear, I'm just asking a question, when I hear the reference of the intention is to, so I'm just wondering, and maybe this is a question for staff, are we at any risk of bringing something into town that we don't, into the city that we don't want, just because being zone commercial and the intention is, another office space, but if that office doesn't show up, are we at risk of it being leased out to, I don't know, pick something that maybe doesn't quite fit the overall city plan, I guess?
If it complies, that's a good question. If it complies with the C2 zoning, it would be allowed to be in there without coming back to this board. That's not anything we could really know without the future. I know the intention of the applicant was to use it as office space.
Right.
That's what we believe it is, but we can't really see,
Right,
can't see into the future. So it is something that's valid.
okay, thank you, thank you.
I had a question on the office and the materials. Was it at one time one property and it's split, or was it always two separate parcels?
Are you talking about just the office building?
Yeah, was it split away from the industrial part, the materials handling 20 years ago? Or was it always two different parcels?
I believe it was always two different parcels. And I believe the original use was office space for the industrial that was present. So I believe they were just two separate parcels. And then, Alyssa, I don't know if you saw any different than that.
I was just trying to figure out how it got the industrial in the first place.
Yeah.
So that's,
I think that's why, it's just because it was related to that industrial use. So it always just went hand in hand with it.
Any other comments or questions from the commission? All right, I'd like to move to close the public hearing.
Second?
Got a second? Discussion? Roll call?
Mayor St. John,
Yes.
Mr. Grumney,
Yes.
Mr. Gokenhour,
yes.
Mrs. Miller,
Yes.
Mrs. Crawford,
Yes.
Mr. Soderman,
Yes.
6 yeas, motion approved.
All right, thank you. All right, the first item up for review from the commission is the conditional use for 801 West Cherry Street. Is there any further discussion related to the conditional use? This is not typical. However, I would just mention that due to the circumstances, rezonings take longer, require more approvals, more public hearings. I think these are both trying to accomplish the same thing, the same end, and the conditional use is appropriate. That said, I'd like to make a motion for approval. Got a second by Mr. Gokenhour. Roll call.
Mayor St. John,
Yes.
Mr. Gokenhour,
Yes.
Mrs. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Grumney,
Yes.
Mr. Soderman,
Yes.
Mrs. Crawford, 6 yeas, motion approved.
Thank you. All right, we do have the commission review for the rezoning application for 801 West Cherry Street. And again, I'd like to open it up to the commission for any discussion. I'd just say that these are the type of rezonings that make our jobs easier. They're trying to go to the appropriate use that it's been used for many, many years. With that said, I'd like to make a motion for approval.
Second.
Second by Mrs. Crawford. Discussion. Roll call.
Mayor St. John,
Yes.
Mrs. Crawford,
Yes.
Mrs. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Gokenhour,
Yes.
Mr. Grumney,
Yes.
Mr. Soderman,
Yes.
6 yeas, motion approved.
Great. Thank you. We'll see you at council. Thank you very much. All right, next is, I did have one question for staff. Stenographer is good to go. No more public hearings, correct?
Yes,
Good
that's
to go.
correct.
Thank you. All right, commission review amendment to approve Kintner Crossing. And we welcome back the applicant for Kintner Crossing. And who would be speaking on behalf of the applicant this evening? Mr. Gary Smith from G2 Planning and Design. Welcome back, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. Members of council, it's good to see you all again. Appreciate the opportunity to come in front of you tonight. Just go to that second slide if you would. There you go. My name is Gary Smith. I'm the owner of G2 Planning and Design. We're at 720 East Broad Street, Columbus, Ohio, 43215. I am here tonight on behalf of the owner. As you will probably recall, I was not here at the meeting in March. One of the reasons that I'm here is that if some of you will recall, I know there's a couple of members on the board, some of you will recall, my firm was responsible for the original zoning for Kentner Crossing. So the group thought that I might be able to help provide, you know, a little bit of a comparison and contrast between what we got approved in 2023 and what we're ultimately trying to do here today. And so I also have with me the full cadre, the entire team, representatives from D.R. Horton, Jack Martino, Dave Dozer, representatives from the legal team. Molly is here. I have folks from EMH&T. Steve Shell is here if you have questions on the engineering, and Romanelli and Hughes is here as well if there are additional questions. If you could go to the next slide. So what we're really asking for this evening is we're seeking an amendment to the Kentner Crossing PRD development plan that was approved by this board in late 2022 and by City Council on February 1 of 2023. What I want to cover tonight in my presentation, quickly, is a presentation of the changes that we're seeking from the 2023 approved plan, and then a discussion of the changes that we've made since the March 5th meeting that was in front of you folks. You hit the next slide. So some of you will recall, and I know we have a couple of new faces here. So this is the original plan as it was approved in 2023. So everything primarily, the boundaries haven't changed, nothing else has changed in the project, but I wanted to kind of share this with you. And one of the things that we always get into when it comes to rezoning is that when you go through a rezoning, and it doesn't matter where you go through the rezoning, here, City of Delaware, City of Columbus, very rarely do you ever have kind of complete and final engineering. And so, you know, you do enough engineering to make sure that you can kind of make the project work. You know, you can get sewer to the site, you can service it, that you can, you know, handle and accommodate stormwater and those kind of things. And then you move forward with the zoning based on that. So in every zoning we do, we always include kind of a disclaimer on all of the sheets here. It basically just says that the development plan is depicted as conceptual in nature, and that final layout may vary or may be adjusted based on kind of design and engineering parameters that come up when you go through the engineering process. I've never done a zoning or a project where we've designed something and then by the time it's engineered, it ends up looking exactly the same. There's always a few changes along the way. The stormwater ponds get a little bigger. They might need to shift. The roads kind of might need to change a little bit, radii, those kind of things. So there's always changes that kind of arise during that process. So if you go to the next slide. So this is what ultimately was submitted and was, I think, discussed by the group on the March 5th meeting. And then the next slide, if you would. This is the development plan that was presented in your packet. One of the things that I did here, just so that I could kind of give a better indication is I asked the EMH&T, you'll notice I asked the EMH&T to remove the lot lines around townhomes. I think it makes the plan easier to read, and it makes it easier for you to kind of evaluate how this townhome layout looks kind of in comparison to the townhome layout that we had provided with the original zoning. So if you go on to the next one. So this is a comparison. I thought it would be helpful if we could just go through and kind of compare ultimately what we had approved in 2023 by the city at that time, and then the plan as it is today, and really talk about kind of the differences. I know we owe you some explanations on some things, and I'm gonna get into that in more detail. So the top is the plan that is proposed to you today. The bottom is the plan that was approved in 2023. And just going through really all of the major statistics for the plan. So if you look at, you know, the total dwelling units, the total townhome units, the total patio units, the project density, None of those things have changed. That's all the same. We're not asking for any major changes in the product or really in the layout or the number of units or the mix of those units. Project open space. So in the text, if you require for 2023, we were required a minimum of 20% open space, which comes out to about 6.95 acres. In our 2023 plan, we had 7.65 acres kind of shown in that plan. In our plan today, we have 7 acres. But I want to go over what that difference is because it's a little bit different. EMH&T has kind of measured the acreage a little bit different than we did. And so I want to point out what those differences are just so that you guys can get a better kind of understanding of what those are. So from the townhome, when you look at townhomes, we are asked to go for from owner occupied. They're still owner occupied. So whether it's condo or fee simple, we're asking to go from condo to fee simple, but it's still an owner occupied condominium. It's still an owner occupied townhome. Maximum height still 36 feet. The building setback from the parkway, the front setbacks, the actual building separation side to side, the parking, all of those things are the same. Parking per code is 2 per unit. Parking provided in on the townhome side in 2023 was 4.1 spaces per unit, so it's more than double what your code requires. We've actually bumped that up now because of some of the discussions to 4.37. So we added even some additional parking spaces, and we'll show you that here in a minute. And then patio home standards haven't changed at all. So those are all the same. One other thing I wanted to point out, which I think is kind of interesting, it doesn't have any bearing on really the rezoning aspect of it. But if you'll notice, when we went through the original zoning, this was what we thought the alignment of the parkway would be. So we had an alignment that we were working with. That alignment actually dictated the shape of this property line and what Highland ultimately bought from the Foremans. Now, the alignment of the parkway has actually changed. And that alignment actually goes up and it moves further away from the property. So now what we're doing is we're actually, our view kind of the project is actually directed, a little bit more in the other direction. So you're not really looking as much at the project as you drive by. But we're also getting more distance between the back of the townhomes than we had in the previous layout. And that's just a function of, again, things change kind of in the engineering, and none of us really understood what the alignment of that parkway would be, once we finish the project. So if you go on to the next slide. So major changes from the 2023 plan. So changing the townhomes. Number one, the biggest change is changing the townhome from a condominium type structure to a fee simple lot arrangement. And then the removal of the Cheshire connector and the installation of emergency access connection. So over the first one, you'll go to the next one. So on this slide, this is actually the development plan that was submitted. So you get to see what it looks like with the lots on. And this was the development plan that was approved from 2023. Now, the townhome layout itself is really primarily the same. The buildings are spaced the same apart. They have the same front setbacks, the same rear setbacks, the same side separation. So really the only thing that's changing is we're kind of drawing an imaginary box around each of the townhomes. Now, why are we doing that? There's really several reasons. The biggest reason is it's better for the buyer. Condominiums carry kind of a different stipulation with them, especially in terms of financing. So fee simple townhomes are much easier for a buyer to finance. They also resale better. So for the people who are going to buy here and live in your community, when they're ready to move out of the townhomes, they're actually going to see an increased value because it's a fee simple arrangement rather than a townhome arrangement and rather than a condo arrangement. And that's really one of the biggest reasons why we do it. And I understand that there was some concern about how does that ownership structure affect kind of the maintenance of the townhomes, those kind of things. We have made some considerable improvements to the homeowners association documents I think those have been submitted to the city. The city has reviewed those. And it's my understanding that, feel comfortable with the additional protections that we've added in terms of the maintenance of those exteriors. So really, from how the townhome is going to look, function, act for the people who are living there, the people who visit there, it's going to be the same. Those boxes obviously won't show up in real life, but they do show up in the standpoint of making things easier for the buyer. And so that's really the biggest reason why we're doing it. And then one of the things that you'll note, and this was in Alex's staff report, and thank you, Alex, for sending that over earlier, is we had to add an addendum onto one of the divergences. And the only reason we did that was because we changed how we were defining the lot coverage for the townhomes. So before, when we didn't have lot lines, the lot coverage was based on the total coverage of the building across the entire sub-area. That included the open space, that included everything else. But because we added the lot lines, we had to go back in and add to the divergence that we had already for the patio homes to include the townhomes as well, because now we're artificially changing how we define the lot coverage based on the fact, again, that we drew a tiny little box around it. So nothing else has changed. The actual coverage of the buildings across the entire sub area isn't any different than what we had ultimately submitted and approved in 2023. It's just that we're redefining how that lot coverage is because of the way the code reads. And that's why we had to add that divergence. So if you have questions about that, I'll be happy to answer it. But if you go to the next slide. So the next big change is really the removal of that Cheshire connection from the previous plans. Actually, would you mind going back real quick? So in the previous plan, if you'll recall, well, this doesn't actually show it, but that's all right. Go back to the next slide if you would. Yeah, there we go. So this connection that went down to Cheshire. All right, so let's go back. Thank you. So that was one of the big reasons why ultimately we came in front of you. And there's a number of things kind of driving that decision. And I think we owed you kind of a better explanation. I think primarily what was indicated is that it's a financial decision, and it is that to some degree. We're not trying to, kind of talk our way through that, but there's also a number of other really good reasons why this makes sense for the project and for the city. So one of the things is, if you look at this right of way here is only 50 feet wide. And so to actually make that road connection and put a bridge in there, that's a pretty substantial bridge. And I think they talked about this a little bit at the last meeting. But we're not, when we went through this process before, we were kind of under the impression, hey, this is no big deal. We'll stick a big culvert in it and, we'll move on with life and we'll just pave over it. Well, that's after having gone through, again, that engineering, that's not an option. So this is going to have to be an actual bridge. And we're talking heavy construction that's going to occur in a 50-foot wide space between those people that are already living there. So we're talking about end walls. We're talking about, a concrete bridge structure, iron. We're talking about all of those kind of things. And then that's ultimately permanently, not only the disruption in the construction, but that's permanently what those people are going to have to look at when they look out their side windows, is this giant, massive concrete structure, beside their house. And then, the third option or the third reason is that if we do that, we're going to take up the entirety of that right of way. And the city is also looking to extend some infrastructure through that right of way. So if that bridge gets built, it's essentially going to take up all of the room in that right of way, and there will be very little room, if at all, left for the city to work to kind of extend that infrastructure. So I think some of the concerns that were expressed at the last meeting in terms of not wanting to kind of disconnect those neighborhoods, I think those are valid concerns. And I think we can do that. And what we've proposed and what's changed from the last plan is we propose to do a pedestrian path and a boardwalk across that stream. And the boardwalk is going to have much less significant impacts, upstream impacts in terms of, the stormwater that flows through there. But it's also going to be a much more pleasant viewing experience for the people who live adjacent to it. It's also going to eliminate the possibility for cut-through traffic from the parkway down, between those neighbors and on to Cheshire. And so there are some benefits to the neighbors that are there along Cheshire. I think there's some benefits to the project to doing it this way, and we still maintain a sense of connection. In fact, what we're really doing is adding, if you look at it, we're actually adding the full path all the way along up to the parkway, down, and then connecting across and then over. So this will give people an opportunity to get from the development, over to Cheshire, over to the school if they want to. The pathway to the school is just a short way up Cheshire, so they could easily access that. And also for people down along Cheshire, if they wanted for some reason to get out and ride their bike along the parkway, they could easily take that path, get up to the parkway as well, and go in either direction. Now, because we're removing that connection, one of the things we had to do, provide emergency access. So I think one of the things that came up at the last meeting was a concern over kind of the location of the emergency access and kind of its proximity to Kentner Parkway and the intersection there at Kentner and 37. So we've reconfigured that access to ultimately come out. So this is the road that goes into kind of the townhome portion. This is the northern section of the project where Kentner Parkway is coming up in US 36. So we are doing, in essence, an emergency access driveway along the open space here on the project. And then we're creating another access through what is now the commercial property, which is getting ready to develop. And this will be a temporary access. Once the commercial develops, the plan is that there will be a road, ultimately an actual road, not an emergency access driveway. There will be an actual road that runs up through the center of this, that provides access to these commercial parcels. And that road is going to connect basically up to Kentner Parkway here. So that road is going to be full in place probably 24 months, 36 months, somewhere in that time frame. In the meantime, this will serve as our emergency access. This access goes out to Cheshire to a much safer location, not out to proximity of the intersection. Now, when this gets built into a full road, this will stay. And the reason we're keeping it ultimately, because it will be controlled access, it will have bollards, so you won't be able to drive on it. The fire department will if they need to. But this will serve a great pedestrian connection from the townhomes down to Kentner Parkway, and then potentially to whatever commercial uses end up down here. So it will ultimately become part of the pedestrian pathway system for its project. So that's going to remain. Then if you go on to the next slide. So I did want to talk about the open space because I think there was some confusion ultimately in the open space last time. So this is the open space diagram from the current plan. And then this is the open space diagram for the plan we had approved in 2023. And part of it, I think it's just terminology. I think we just call it common open space or, but if you looked at it from what we approved in 2023, ultimately what we had counted as called common open space or part of that 20% or 7 acres or 7.4 acres was we actually counted this as open space, not the basin itself. We counted all of this as open space. And then we counted the main part and the townhome part as open space. So we counted those two things as open space. Well, back to engineering changes. One of the things that changed is the pond had to get bigger to handle the stormwater. When I drew this pond, didn't have an idea of exactly how much stormwater we needed. So the pond had to get bigger. So really, in effect, this, aside from the fact that we're now putting a path through it, they just took the approach that we really couldn't call this part of a common open space anymore like we were before. So really what they did was focus the common open space on these areas over here, and ultimately the area that would have the path in it that would provide, pedestrian circulation over here. And the one thing that I did want to point out about this, that's kind of different, is we actually got more open space concentrated in kind of the community area. Now, it doesn't look like a lot, but there is more open space in there. These spaces have actually gotten wider. So this Reserve C here, they're calling that, have that identified as 4.8 acres. It was 4.72 acres in our original plan. The community, the area in the townhomes that was reserved for the community pavilion is now 1 acres. And before, it was a little over 1/2 acre in our previous plan. So some of these open spaces, what I would classify as the more usable open spaces, actually got bigger. They actually improved for the experience of the people that are going to be living there. And so that really is kind of primarily the difference in the open space and why that, why you're seeing kind of a difference there. Does that make sense for everybody? All right. And then last one, I think I have one more slide for you. So then the last thing, so the plan change, talking about the changes from March 5th, your last meeting to today. So the biggest change is we added the multi-use pathway and the boardwalk. And if you want to see boardwalks looks like, there's some pictures in the middle. I didn't include them in the presentation, probably should have. But this is a nice, well-designed wood boardwalk now over this stream and then this pathway. So that's one major change from March 5th. We added the emergency access connection. So we took the emergency access connection from here and we added it basically over here. We shifted, I know there was some concern about this mailbox location being moved from its original location. So we moved it back down here to get it out of the main entrance. And then we increased the total number of guest parking spaces from 15 spaces to a total of 40 designated spaces. If we striked out the area here, we also spread these spaces out quite a bit more. And again, we're still more than double what the code requires for parking. And then the non-plan changes that we made from the last go around is that we updated and strengthened the HOA documents to give everybody a little bit more comfort about how those townhomes were going to be maintained and that you have some common maintenance. We've eliminated the white vinyl privacy fence in behind the townhomes as was requested. We eliminated the side yard setback encroachments for townhomes. We added the divergence, which I explained for the townhomes because of the change to the lots. And then we updated the typo that was pointed out kind of in the last go around. And so that's really kind of a summary of where we were, where we are, how we got here. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have about the changes to the site plan. And if you have any questions about the product itself, like I said, we have Jack here and we have DMH&T here to answer any engineering specific questions.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Smith. I made direct to the staff report. Would you like to cover anything from the staff report? And I think we'll come back to you if that's okay.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
And say Mr. Smith touched on most of what I was going to say regarding the changes, at least. A few things to add in. I did add in some notes looking at specifically for the patio homes. I know we're not having most of this conversation is not geared around them, but looking at that, most of all of the divergences requested for the patio homes are consistent with what have been approved in Miller's Cove and the retreat at Sunbury Meadows. So the patio homes we have in town, they remain consistent, if not better than what divergences were already approved as far as those go. And for townhomes, we don't have too many own townhomes within the city. I couldn't find any text regarding condo associations or that. So the only thing I had comparably was just looking at lot coverage in them. They're just two per building, two per structure. We're looking at between 20% and 45% lot coverage on those. And those are located on North Miller Drive, right across from where Miller's Cove is, behind McDonald's and over there. So that's the only real comparable townhome that we have within the city. But as Gary said, Gary went over most of the changes, but I'd be happy to touch on those if you want me to go into my list of changes that I noted, but he covered most of them.
Were there any that he didn't cover that you would like?
The only notable one, there was a difference in acreage, but I'm assuming it's due to the emergency access going from the southeast. So in that original plan up top, it kind of cuts off and swoops a little earlier. And then the plan on the bottom, it goes down further into the right. I don't know if you guys want to speak on that, or when you come back up, you can as well. But it went from it's at 17.66 acres now, and it was 17.7. So it seems consistent with that pathway. Aside from that, I'll do a quick look and make sure I got everything else touched on. So it's walking path in the south corner, emergency access has changed. The cluster mailboxes have changed as well. As Gary mentioned, the sidewalk being moved up from the 5 foot traditional sidewalk into the 8 foot multi-use path to connect up to the Sunbury Parkway on the west side of the properties. And then the parking has changed, as Gary mentioned, not specifically, but looking at the north side off of Private Street A, I think it was brought up in the last meeting, the individual parking spots that are kind of in the open space, they've just been rearranged. So now there's 3 portions as opposed to I believe they were broken up into 2 groups prior, and now they're broken up into 3 groups of 3 parking instead. So just broken up a little more. And then the fences being removed and front elevations of the homes, as you guys have seen, has changed in the packets as well. And materials are still consistent, but just a change in look based on that. And the covenant and condo agreement was updated as well, as Gary said. But those are all my main notes on that.
I did have one question, and then I had a couple of comments. One was, did legal staff review the covenants, conditions, easements, restrictions, document in detail, and were satisfied with where those are?
Yes, Mayor, we did. As Mr. Smith indicated, they did submit already the proposed declaration of covenants for the homeowner association, and they do now include the obligation imposed upon the homeowner association to maintain the exteriors of townhomes. It also imposes the obligation upon them to establish and collect adequate reserves from the occupants or the owners to do so. So in that regard, that it's operating more like what you would see in a condo situation, albeit it is now a fee simple situation. But we did review, and we're comfortable. I would ask, to the extent there is a motion made tonight, that it's made conditioned upon final legal review, just so if there is any additional tweaking with that language moving forward, we can do that.
Okay, thank you. I did wanted to give just a little bit of history in between March and this particular meeting. So over the past 4 months, I've met with representatives from D.R. Horton, EMH&T, also Romanelli and Hughes, and most recently Gary Smith from G2 Planning. I will give them quite a bit of credit for both hearing our feedback, acting on our feedback, and going through multiple iterations and seeing what options potentially work. I also want to give you credit. Gary Smith did not call out. You added, it looks like, another CBU location on what would be the west side. And thank you for doing that. So I wanted to call out just specific improvements on this plan versus the last one. I'll start with the pedestrian connection. This is probably where we spent the most time evaluating options on the ingress, egress, the connection into Cheshire Road. I had asked EMH&T and Romanelli and Hughes and D.R. Horton to show me why they could not make a vehicular connection there. We felt like that was very important from an access standpoint. I'd seen, I think, 3 versions of that. The versions that were presented were extremely intrusive, both to the environment would create additional flood risk for an area prone to flooding. And just visually, as Mr. Smith called out to the adjacent residents, they would be basically sitting on top of pretty significant, what I call it, a retaining wall, but think of it as an industrial grade, heavy industrial grade structure there. And then you probably wouldn't be able to make the pedestrian connections if you made it two-way access. So I want to thank you for evaluating those options, but also thank you for making that pedestrian connection. That will be a great connection on the Sunbury Parkway. We don't have the trail connection made to Cheshire Road to the school yet, but we will. And I thank you for that. Thanks for the concession on CBUs. I think that's just a practical change. Very much appreciate you listening to us. I want to thank you. I think Mr. Stotterman or Mr. Grumney had focused in on the parking. I think, first of all, the exhibits that you presented, making them easy to interpret where the parking is, how much parking, calling out the additional parking in between the buildings was a great tactic on your part. And I think just very practical for us to be able to visualize those changes. We already talked about the covenants and restrictions, and the elevations, a huge improvement on the elevations. I know there's a cost to doing those. We think of this as an entry point or a connection point into the city, where 3637 is going to branch off into Sunbury Parkway. And great job on improving those. And thanks for removing the vinyl fence. My single regret from the first approval. And last thing I'll call out, Gary Smith, thanks for taking us through the lineage and the changes and why the changes are. And I didn't have this pre-rehearsed, but I was taking notes as we were going here. I think it is important to note the separation between the property line, and as in Sunbury Parkway has progressed. The property was split, the property was sold. Now Sunbury Parkway is further north. In other words, you're enhancing that buffer. There's also a 40-foot landscape buffer within your property, and significantly mounded. And I think I forget what the reference is to the landscaping, but basically it's going to be heavily wooded on top of that landscape buffer, plus the additional buffering, which looks like it's maybe 40 to 80 feet somewhere in there at its widest north of your property line. Thanks for all your changes. I'm sure this isn't all going to be roses. I'm sure folks are going to have some critiques to say, but great progress, and thank you very much. I'd like to open it up to the commission for comments or questions.
I have just a quick question on the boardwalk. Is that going to be part of the HOA, or is it going to be the city's?
Yeah, it'll be part of the HOA.
Okay.
The HOA will be responsible for maintaining it.
I just like to say, I echo what the mayor said. I like the changes. I think we were listened to, and I know there's a lot of hard work that goes in all these changes. My only, I guess, question is, I know you had mentioned when you do the first draft, you don't know everything. When the engineer makes a plan, you do with what you know. But I guess, and I agree with that, except I think it's also an opportunity to maybe, and I'm not saying this is the case in this example, but sometimes you can bring a rosier picture to the table and knowing that, well, the chances that this is going to be the final version is probably not, because we're going to find things out, which leads me to the connector to Cheshire Road. So was there no indication in the first submittal that would be a costly, difficult endeavor to add that connection? Because again, I just want to make sure that as a city and as a commission, that we're not getting brought plans that look great, and then with a little bit of investigation, it's like, well, we can't do that, but we can do the the old switcheroo, I guess is all I'm saying.
No, I think that's a good question.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. When we initially came forward with the project, I think that we didn't have that connection. And then I think as we were going through the process, the city kind of said, hey, we really need a connection here. We've got a space. We added the connection. We took kind of a cursory look. And, when you look at those things just on a preliminary basis, you look at that and you say, okay, well, we know what the profile of the stream channel is and those kind of things. And so we think we can cover that with like a conspan or, you know, a regular culvert, and the cost won't be that significant. Aside from the cost of the road, you know, that is a costly piece of it. But, you know, we, you know, initially thought that we could do that without a whole lot of disruption and a whole lot of cost. Now, you know, what you don't do when you kind of evaluate that process as you're going through the zoning is like a full hydrologic study of what the impacts of that actually are, because that's a very expensive and kind of lengthy process. So when you actually start doing the hydraulic studies of that stream corridor, finding out how much water flows through there, and what that space has to be to allow that water to continue to flow without actually running the risk of backing up or, you know, stuff getting jammed in there and causing flooding further upstream for, you know, all the homeowners that live up there. It became very clear that something significantly more substantial was required. And I think that's where we all kind of started to panic and say, this is going to be significantly different than we all anticipated, which is kind of why we are here today.
So, yeah, no, I appreciate it. And to be honest, and for the record, I like the new alternative better than that one. I think it's less invasive to those homeowners. I think it's going to be less congested. Going right out on Cheshire Road, which can tend to be busy depending on the time of the day anyways. So I like this alternative, and it adds additional path for people to connect. So I like the alternative. I'm just curious about how we went from, and you explained why, but I just from the original to the different now back to the new alternative.
Well, it's a good question and a legitimate question. We appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, why did we receive a revised tab 4 sheet 10? What changed? It was this slide here?
That was the only thing.
4 rather than 6?
Yeah.
Why is that important?
No, what changed on there was that if you look at that elevation, there's no brick on the back of that elevation. It was an incorrect error. We added the wrong elevation to the back of that sheet. And so we revised that to add the new elevation that actually complied with the code requirements. So that's the only reason for the change. Once we looked at it and submitted it, sometimes you can look at these things 100 times and not catch everything. Once we submitted it, we looked at it and said, oh, well, wait a minute, this isn't the elevation we intended to submit. So we revised that.
Correct elevation has stone or brick.
Yeah, that's correct. As required by the zoning text. That's right.
Looking at that rear elevation, it's very flat. Is there any chance you could add like a portico or an overhang over the patio door just to kind of break it up?
I'm going to let D.R. Horton answer those questions. It's more of a product related decision and I can't make those decisions for him.
Yeah.
So.
Sure.
I'm Jack Montiel. I'm the division president with D.R. Horton here in Columbus. So first off, thank you for the comments thus far. We appreciate it. And we certainly appreciate staff and everyone else's time in terms of having the opportunity to modify, or at least represent. As far as the question goes, what we had done with those plans was we had modified, obviously, the front elevation significantly. And then there was a lot of delineation between roof lines. We carried that delineation between the roof lines in the back. Though I understand that it is flat, we had originally designed it to meet the specification of having the stone on 25% of the rear and sides as well. Adding that additional portico or porch is a possibility that we would agree to. Whether that be on every unit or every other unit or 50% of a particular building, I would be fine with that. Some type of covered porch on the rear to show additional delineation or additional discernment between the units. I would be fine with that on 50% of a particular building. So if it's an 6-unit building, 30 of the units would have that. If it's a 4-unit building, then 2 would. And I think that would give us the kind of the look that we would want. So Good enough? Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Any comment? Yeah, I have a couple comments. I don't know if there's any questions in this, but two comments. So I in 2019, when I purchased a home in Sunbury, I live over here in Sunbury Meadows, one of the new developments. And after I lived there for a while, I noticed that there was some little red stop sign shaped signs in the front of some of the yards, and it said, "No more high density development." I thought they meant me. This is what they were talking about. This is an egregious overstep of the amount of units that should be put. This is a complete money grab. I'm very disappointed that this is something that was approved in 2023. I am dead firmly set against this kind of development, this kind of volume going into this community. I think there's statements in the brochure that said this is going to have low impact on the school system. I firmly disagree. 180 living units is going to bring a lot of children. I don't care if you think they're going to, this is going to be retirees and empty nesters and young families with no children. 180 units is going to add 180 children or more. For a school district that has, I don't know, 4,000 students, 200 additional students is a 5% increase coming from 40 acres of property. How many more 40-acre lots are there in this community that are going to get another 180 units? This is too many units. I'm against it.
When this was originally approved, this was approved for multifamily. This is a reduction in the number of units.
Correct, but the zoning ordinance, excuse me, allows for 2.5 dwelling units per acre, and then there are variances permitted for different conditions. One of those conditions is proximity to a thoroughfare. You can get an additional 1.0 dwelling units. Okay, that takes us to 3.5 dwelling units per acre. This doesn't meet any of the other three of the four criteria. So I would say 3.5 units per dwelling units per acre is the cap. And we're at 4.71. I prefer to see something that's 140 units in this piece of property, not 188 units. I think this is excessive. There's too many apartments going up. There's too many, and I view apartments, townhomes, condos to be one product. They are massive amounts of people in very small amounts of space.
The impact of the school question, though, and I'm not going to get into a debate on this. This is the facts. In your neighborhood, you have two sections of homes. There's 1/3 acre lots, which is considered low density. Would you say your house is low density?
Yeah.
You would? Okay.
My section is, I live on 1/8 of an acre.
And you live on 1/8 of an acre?
65 by
You live in
125.
the community of Sunbury?
Yeah.
It's a 1/3 acre lot. Yours is an eighth of an acre lot on the Bent Drive, the retreat. Your neighborhood has one pupil per household. That's a $12,000 impact per home. Okay. The same neighborhood, just a patio home product, has one pupil per every 10 homes.
See, that's where I disagree. I don't think
It's not a disagreement. It's a fact. We did a FOIA request to the school last year, and it's completely shifted. I mean,
So we're going to stop people with single children from buying patio
no,
homes?
that's what you're saying. You're saying we need bigger homes, smaller lots, 140. If you have 140.
They're not smaller lots, fewer homes per lot.
Fewer lots, right? 140 homes that are just bigger.
Rather than 188, correct.
Bigger homes, right?
Fewer homes,
Okay,
fewer. Closer to the 2.5 in the zoning ordinance.
okay. But
The
not,
zone
you're not,
double.
I hear what you're saying. I'm not going to debate this, but in terms of the.
I'm just giving my opinion. I'm not opening a debate. I'm just saying as a new member of the community, I don't think this is smart development.
Okay, well,
Put in all the commercial you want, generate revenue, but don't bring 10,000 more people into a community with 10,000.
right, understood.
That's it. That's my comment. That's my vote. So that's why I'm here. I'm here to
I
be a member of the community, giving you my opinion on
Right.
super high density development and residents.
Super high density is a relative term. That is a relative term. There's,
Absolutely.
yeah, so I just want to make, when you say super high density, that's not a.
Better than anything around here. How about that?
This is higher than anything around.
higher density.
Than anything around here. Okay,
You disagree?
I disagree. Yes, we have Cortland Apartments right next to General Rosecrans. That's higher density.
I would have been
That's
against
net
that as well.
positive to the schools, net walkable. We have less road maintenance, less sewer line repair. Like, there's less expense all over. And if we're talking about driving prosperity, the way we drive less prosperity is through 1/3 acre lot housing developments, which is where I live and where you live.
That doesn't drive prosperity.
No, in
Higher
terms of,
value
like,
homes.
I'll take you through the balance sheet if you like, but this isn't purely a mathematical equation here. I'm just saying, based on, the reason I'm gonna vote yes on this is it was either multifamily or it was something with more harmony related to, like, right up against the parkway. This is gonna be a major thoroughfare. And you wanna do less homes. This is valuable real estate.
Yeah, so make it
You're gonna
commercial.
vote no,
Make it
and
commercial.
that's okay. Make it commercial.
Yeah, you're saying it's access to the thoroughfare. That's where you put commercial. You don't put homes and people. You don't cram them in.
No, it was our master plan.
That's what I'm saying, the master plan, you're the one that said this. The master plan is a guide. It's not the rule book. It's a guide. The guide can change. It changed to make it part of the comprehensive plan.
Right, and this is already rezoned. This is a rezoned approved plan.
I wasn't part of the commission in 2023.
I
You didn't
understand.
have a voice back then. I'm just voicing my opinions now, so you understand when I say no, it doesn't come as a surprise.
No,
I said no.
I very much appreciate that. We're gonna go to a vote.
Can I just interject one thing?
I hope it's very helpful because we're gonna go to a vote.
It's, all I want to say is, I understand where everybody's at, and Joe, you even mentioned in the last meeting, when you were here, when we brought this through the first time, you didn't vote for it. That's fine. One thing I just wanted to point out for everybody is, if you voted no on this tonight, the project still gets built. It still gets built to look like what was approved before. The project doesn't go away. So what we're really voting on tonight is do the changes make it a better plan? Do the changes make sense? The project's going to get built one way or the other. It isn't going to go away. So the question is, if in front of you tonight, what form do you want that project to take?
And I just like to add 2 cents too. And I hear all these opinions and everyone's obviously have strong ones and they have their own reason for thinking it. And being a resident for 50+ years, I understand the density question. I understand, but people want to move here. I mean, this is a great town or city, I should say. The one thing that I've heard since I've been on council and now on zoning is that Sunbury does not have a good choice of diversity in housing. We have the single family home that costs $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 if someone wants to move new into this neighborhood, and not everybody can do that. But I don't think that it should exclude people from being able to move into the city. And I think if we sit there and say we're just going to build $500,000-$600,000 homes on 30-acre lots, then we're just going to get more of the same. And I don't think that's at least for me. I don't want to be someone who says I live in Sunbury, but you can't. Right. I don't want to be to say, well, I'm the last one that moved here and I want to be the last person that moved here. I don't want anyone to follow me because I want to stay this size. That's you don't get to make that decision. So I do think we need housing diversity. I do think we need options for other people. I have 3 kids right now that tried like heck to try to find houses, want to live in Sunbury, and some they can't because they can't afford a $400,000 or a $350,000 starter home. So that we've got to have choices for people. People are commuting, people are more active. People don't want the responsibility of a large home and 1/3 of an acre to take care of. They want a small. My wife and I are downsizing. This is the type of thing we're looking for. We want to go somewhere where we don't have to worry about mowing grass and shoveling our driveway or, doing all that stuff. So,
And you don't want to leave the community that you raised your family in.
Right. And I understand everyone's viewpoint. It's a very personal thing, but I think we have to look a little broader about where Sunbury is going, and we're not going to be able to just put a band around and say, okay, this is it. This is all we're going to do. I don't think that's realistic, and people are selling their land. They have a right to sell their land, and we have to do the smart thing with it. And I think if we build commercial right next to the city, I don't think the citizens are going to be happy with that. I don't think they're going to be happy living right behind big and commercial buildings right along the new parkway right here leading up into town. So I I feel it's a good product. I feel you've made the changes we've asked for. In a perfect world, if people live here and say, yeah, I just want to keep it 8,000 people and not another new person, that's great, but that's not your choice. So anyways, that's my 2 thoughts or 2 cents.
Any other comments?
Make a motion to approve
I'll
with the
second.
contingency of the legal approval and also the 50% addition of some covered structure on the back of the house to each building. Is that adequate?
Prior to that, can we get a motion to untable? I believe this was moved to table.
Make a motion to untable.
Second.
Second, Mrs. Miller. Discussion, roll call.
Mayor St. John,
Yes.
Mrs. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Gokenhour,
No.
Mr. Grumney,
Yes.
Mrs. Crawford,
Yes.
Mr. Soderman,
No.
4 yeas, motion approved.
Need a motion on the application.
All right, I'll make a motion on the application pending legal and engineering review and approval, and also the 50%. Can somebody finish the sentence for me?
Portical change or something over the patio. Second.
Got it. Mrs. Miller. On 50% of the building. Or 50% of the units per building. Thank you. Discussion. Roll call.
Mayor St. John,
Yes.
Mrs. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Gokenhour,
No.
Mr. Grumney,
Yes.
Mrs. Crawford,
Yes.
Mr. Soderman,
No.
4 yeas, motion approved.
Thank you. All right, we're on to the commission review amendment to the comprehensive plan, Sunbury Parkway Master Plan. Mr. Hennessy, would you like to kick us off?
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe this was tabled at the last motion for
This
the
was
last.
not tabled.
This was not
Does
tabled.
not need to be
Okay.
untabled.
Okay. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to come back. At the last meeting, we had talked about the Sunbury Parkway District Plan and the Planning and Zoning Commission's consideration of that. Just for a brief procedural recap, the plan is proposed to be an amendment to the city's 2016 comprehensive plan. Following commission's consideration, it's important to note there will be another opportunity for public comment, as we'll have a public hearing before the city council consideration of this document as well. After council consideration, I think it's also important to note that the implementation of the plan will still require several zoning amendment changes to basically create the zones that are proposed in the district. So there is another opportunity to be back in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission with those proposed changes. As I've indicated in the past, the Parkway development, we think is a generational opportunity that obviously will define our community for years to come, but also helps us diversify our tax base, which we've talked briefly about already this evening. Obviously, it's a huge responsibility, one that should not be taken lightly, which is the reason why almost 2 years ago, we engaged in the planning process to establish the plan that you see in front of you today. For those who missed the meeting last month, we had a healthy and lengthy discussion at the previous meeting about a variety of topics in the document, including housing density. We talked about public engagement. We talked about the treatment of utilities. We talked about open space. We talked about several items. But those are some of the ones that were the primary topics that were discussed. So I just wanted to add a couple of things. Members are certainly rightfully concerned about density and rightfully concerned about the concentration of dense housing recommendations that are in the plan. I get that. But we also have talked about the importance of diversifying the tax base to ensure that, the tax burden is shared more broadly in terms of the support of public services by all of those who live, reside, work in our city, own property, what have you. I did want to add this. So I did go back and look of the 7 proposed new zones. 4 of those zones list medium to high density housing as a primary or secondary use. But I think it's also important to note that 5 of the districts list commercial, retail, or office uses as a primary or secondary use. Of the 4 zones with the medium to high density designation, only 1 of them is located east of Galena Road. The steering committee and the public comment very sensitive to the fact that the closer we get to the historic core of Sunbury, the more impact that kind of entity could have on preserving the character of our community. So only 1 of those zones that talks about medium to high density, like I said, is east of Galena Road. And that district is neighborhood mixed use district. And just as a reminder, I mean, a mixed use district by its name implies that it's not just housing, it's some combination of uses. Another important thing I think that I should point out is that the plan does introduce the idea of nodes as a conceptual framework. One of the things I think we ought to also keep in mind, 3 of the 4 zoning districts at least list medium to high density housing as a primary or secondary use are located in the highway node. The highway node, again, west of Galena Road. And I think if you go back and look at the overarching goals of the highway zone, a couple that jump out at me is to attract and support catalytic users. It does talk about density supporting the infrastructure and character. We talked a little bit about, you know, in order to be able to build that roadway, provide the infrastructure to support the development of the parkway, it does require some level of density. And the plan talks about that density being out near the interstate, not that density being closer to the urban core. So I think when we think about the plan in its totality, you know, I think maybe one of the other messages I just hope that you will hear is that while there are several references to medium to high density housing, when you think about the plan in its entirety, you read it in its entirety, you know, it does talk about a more balanced approach to development. So, so maybe just a couple of points to add on that. So anyway, I guess maybe the final point I would note is that even though the plan is not in place yet, I mean, I can assure you that when developers come to the city, we are already talking about protecting that land that fronts to the parkway for commercial uses. We always ask them, what's your plan for a commercial use of this space as well? We have engaged outside consultant to help us do a study out near the interchange to see kind of what the saturation point might be for dense housing. And while that's not a perfect science, what I will say is, again, that we're conscious of the fact that housing on its own, you know, is not going to create the kind of diverse tax base that we're looking for. It also is not, it also needs the commercial uses there as well to support it. So with that, you know, I know we're back in front of the commission, wanted to be back in front of a full board, and hope that you will consider the plan favorably.
Questions, comments, or questions from the commission?
I do. I actually watched last month, so I know what was spoken on. And a couple of the things that I had after watching it, my feeling about the commercial and senior not being represented in the document, like Joe had mentioned. So I went and read it again. Mm-hmm. And so trying to figure out why I felt that way and other members didn't, you know. One of the things was because residential is mentioned in the title and in so many different categories, the word commercial and its examples is a minority in the document. And so that's probably why I feel it's not represented enough in the document. Another thing was I was surprised how small it was. The color purple for the gateway commercial was, which I expected it to kind of be a little bigger at that point on that side of the map. So I was kind of surprised. And then on seniors, just like families and the other adults, empty nesters and everything, there's a different type of seniors. And that really wasn't addressed in the type of discussion and even the comments that residents were talking about in the surveys and everything. So that kind of left me hanging there. So that's kind of where I felt. I understand that it's a neutral kind of a open document to kind of give you a feeling. And so I'm just kind of giving my feelings since it's supposed to be a feeling document.
Well, hopefully it's a planning document as well. But those are good points. I mean, I think, certainly as we worked with the consultant, I think senior housing maybe being an example of that. While we didn't call out specifically senior housing, I think we were trying to
It's
call
not
out.
even really senior housing as per se, but because things for seniors to do, I know like as I get older, you know, my husband just went and joined, you know, Common Source Point, you know, and it's a long ways away. And thinking about, you know, in 5-6 years, how we're going to get there. And I know they're looking at expanding and there's nothing on this side of the county, you know, things like that. I think need to be brought into the topics too. Because there's a difference between active seniors, between the 55 and maybe even up to 75, 80, and the ones that are older. You know, that
Sure.
need help, like the Emmett Walnut Trail.
Yeah. Well, maybe just one comment on that. You know, the plan is about future land uses. You're right. It doesn't speak to specific uses and whether or not those, again, might resonate with any particular segment of the demographic. But maybe one thing that we aren't doing particularly well with, as the city of Sunbury, is we've had this conversation about seniors. We actually have engaged with Source Point. We do have a monthly gathering that's sponsored by the Source Point folks that's right here in Town Hall as a way to bring those senior activities closer to our portion of the county so that people don't have to travel to the, you know, to the western side. So, so this is one document. It certainly isn't all of what the city might be doing to kind of, you know, help, you know, improve the community long-term for all of its residents.
And I like to say, I echo Deb's comments about the senior, and I appreciate Joe bringing it up last time, because I do think people want to age here. They want to live here, but then the options get limited as you get to an age where you can't maintain your home, or you need a little extra assistance. So I'm thinking of seniors, not just active seniors, you know, playing pickleball and stuff, but I'm thinking more of those that still want to maybe be independent, but still need that help. And but they're forced to move out of Sunbury to a Westerville or to a Delaware or something. It'd be nice to be able to keep those folks, like a Willowbrook, for example, or something like that, that where's, you know, a senior person can, you know, I lived here, I want to stay here, I just need some help. So I think that I'd like to consider that as we look to living options as the plan develops.
Sure.
I'm gonna,
Yeah, I'm sorry, thank you.
I'm gonna reiterate my biggest concerns. Number one, the person who we've contracted to help guide us through this process, in my opinion, is out of touch with Sunbury. They obviously don't live here and drive around. One of the big things you're pushing for is lots of more high density apartments, whatever it may be. If you drive out to Berkshire, they built 1 million apartments on the other side of the highway. And just in the past month or so, now they're building apartments on this side right in front of Tanger Outlet. In my opinion, they're out of touch. They're out of touch because they're telling us in their market analysis that we need more auto parts stores. I can stand at Pizza Hut and throw a baseball and hit 3 of them. Tell me we need more. We don't need more. I'm not happy that I'm seeing things that go against our current master plan. For instance, as we get away from the center of Sunbury, it's supposed to get more spread out. With that being said, your neighborhood mixed use, which is right up against Route 3637, that is medium density and high density both. The other thing that frustrates me, back to the senior housing, in the market analysis, it says the share of Sunbury's households that are senior living alone has decreased contrary to the trend of the county and the state. Well, it's a trend because there's nowhere for them to live here. Instead, we build more Romanelli apartments behind the perfect place where we should have been building senior living. You're putting in this master plan, you're putting the seniors. I see, I'm going to go off of what you're telling me here. You have the highway node. It mentions senior housing. The transitional mode, which is in the middle, senior housing. There is no mention of senior housing in the existing mode, which butts up to Sunbury. We have more high density though. So those are my major frustrations.
With, just a quick
Sure.
clerical question. If we wanted to amend or add on the fly, for example, add senior housing as primary use into the existing node, I mean, is it as simple as we're making those changes?
Yeah, I mean, it's our plan.
Okay.
So, I mean, this is the consultant's recommendation. But at the end of the day, it's Sunbury's plan.
Any other comments or questions? I had one recommendation, or at least something I'd like to discuss with the group. In neighborhood mixed use, it's the pink block.
Mhm.
I'm gonna find it. It references both medium density residential and high density residential.
Mhm.
I had a chance to talk to Mr. Gokenauer between our last meeting, and that one in particular had slipped by me initially. High density, at least with the way that they're depicted in this plan, it's anything over 20 units to an acre. And I would make a recommendation to strike high density residential from anywhere in the pink, because it is in the transitional and existing node only.
Hey, Mayor, do you have that page number?
So it's referenced on page number 29. And then the map, well, the map is, I think, the area that the mayor was talking about.
Number 5.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's 6 on my packet. The other one 5.
figure 4.9. So that's page 30.
I think it passed it.
Yeah, it's go to 29.
Just a couple. Right there.
So neighborhood mixed use. So the recommendation is to strike the high density residential as a use, as a primary use, or as a use completely. And then if you scroll up a couple more, get to the 29. No, not sorry. If you're scrolling down. Yeah. Go to the map. You're close. Yeah. Here. So basically, then this area, which includes the Kidder Parkway, or the Kidder Crossing property. So you're saying that medium density would be the highest use allowed in that zone.
That'd be my recommendation. I also had one other item that I haven't talked to anybody about, and this is usually dangerous territory for me, but Mr. Gokenauer had me thinking, and then after Mr. Stotterman and I were just discussing something, I also wanted to just propose something on page 27. Can you go to that, Alex? In the spirit of attempting to trying to come closer to our existing zoning code. This will require all new zoning codes. I know we're all aware of that. But in the top right paragraph, I think Mr. Gokenauer in the last meeting had discussed where it's in text form represented what the plan says are low density, medium density, and high density. Low density being less than 5 units to an acre, medium density being 5 to 20, and high density residential is more than 20. And I would, I think I'd like to make a recommendation for a change specifically to medium and high. Medium being 6 to 15 units to an acre, and high being greater than 16. And the reason I chose those numbers, they're not arbitrary. It more aligns with our planned commercial district and multi-family zoning code around densities. I think the highest density we've ever approved was the DRK Apartments, the Ravines at Meadow Ridge, which was 16 units to an acre or thereabout.
No, I thought it was around 12-ish.
Okay.
Closer to 12.
Okay. And I just felt like 20 was getting out of sync in my opinion. Those are the two recommendations. And the other item that, Daryl, I think I've struggled with trying to wrap my mind around here, and how do we get to it? This plan does focus a lot on housing, and I can reference back to over the past 2 years when this plan was being developed, there was, and there still is, maybe to a lesser degree now, a big focus on housing in this area. This was coming on the heels of Intel being announced and the demand and property values skyrocketing and the like. But I don't know if we do it as part of this approval because we haven't done any scientific research, but there has to be some sort of cap or saturation metric, to your point, within these districts. If there's going to be housing permitted in 5 of these particular zoning districts that are yet to be created, there has to be some cap in that district in a specific area. The last thing anybody wants is to create a new zoning district that allows for high density housing, and then anywhere where that zoning district is, all of its housing. That is not the intent of this plan. The intent of this plan is to have a mixed use district, a mixed use plan. And that is referenced in our Sunbury Comprehensive Plan in 2016. The small bullet points related to Sunbury Parkway, there's 3 of them. One of them is to create a mixed use district, mixed use being a mix of housing and commercial, living in harmony with one another. I think the plan opens us up potentially to, without restrictions, I think it opens it up to interpretation that somebody could just go put housing wherever they wanted. If we created a zoning district that said a permitted or primary use is X. That's I think my concern.
So my initial reaction to that then would be, I mean, we can certainly convey in some way in the resolution that, or the motion that you'd like council to consider that. But to me, it feels like I'd really like to, I think, do a little bit more research around how to determine that. Is it, I'm just throwing this out as an example, is this the type of thing where, before a project that, recommends some level of housing, must complete some sort of a study to show that, again, it's the economics workers, whatever, in the district as part of their plan submission going forward. And we could include that as a requirement of your zoning application, when you get to that point. But then that would be something we would reflect in the zoning code, which we know we need to do. We know we need to create the zoning district. So perhaps that would be a way to get at it. I'd like to at least figure out a more, objective way of determining what constitutes, saturation.
Right. I agree with that. Yeah,
So there was one other, I don't think I caught it, Mayor. You were referencing the senior in which node, or maybe I didn't, was it a node or was it a?
It was a node in the existing node. I can't remember the page.
Yeah.
Where it's highlighting.
Okay.
In the existing node, there was no primary use, I think, primary focus on senior housing.
Right. Okay.
Medium and high density.
I got it. Okay.
Page 26.
Yeah, page 26. I agree. So like I said, it's your plan. It's the city's plan. At the end of the day, it's not the consultant's plan. So the 3 things I jotted down here, we're going to change the density if this is where the commission wants to be. Change the definition of density per the recommendations the mayor had indicated. Add senior housing as a supported land use in the existing node, and then remove the high density residential from the neighborhood mixed use list of uses. Remove it in its entirety. And then this issue of, again, determining a saturation point, we'll examine that as part of the zoning amendment process.
Any other comments or questions?
On the saturation point, and I don't have my thought all the way through. one of the things that when I think of saturation point and residential housing is, the different types of housing. You know, you can be saturated with apartments and be underserved with either single family homes or condos, or you could be overserved, like we talked about on the value. The houses are so expensive that we need lower priced housing offerings, you know, and I don't know how you would define that in a saturation point in a document.
Yeah, which is a reason why I think I'd like to study that a little bit more and see if there's, I don't know, a best practice out there that another community might be using. Maybe there is a tool that that exists. I mean, my thought was the saturation point you're trying to study is really the request that's being made. So if somebody's requesting a townhome product, you know, I think they have to indicate, you know, is that market saturated? They don't have to prove if the condo market's saturated or if the single family unit is saturated. They're asking for townhomes. They got to prove that it's not saturated. That's at least, again, kind of the initial thought. But how to do that will require some more work.
I would also add, as Joe mentioned, saturation point should also be in the region, not just Sunbury. Because if we're bumping up to Berkshire and, you know, Harlan, Township and all these others, we have to, in Galena, we have to take what they're doing right up against us as part of the saturation.
Okay.
What's the recommendation? Are you recommending that we move forward with these?
Yeah, with these caveats. I mean, I can repeat them if that helps, or
It's probably a good idea that we repeat them, at least for posterity's sake.
Yes, I think it's a good idea to make sure we understand what we're voting on.
all right. So on page 26 of the report, we will add senior housing as a supported land use in the existing node. On page 27, the definition of density. So I'll just read it. For all land use districts, low density residential is less than 5 units per acre. Medium density residential is between 6 to 15 units per acre. And over 16 units per acre, or in high density residential is more than 16 units per acre. And then on the page 29, we're going to strike the high density residential as a permitted use under neighborhood mixed use. So those are the 3 changes to the plan. And then again, adding the caveat that we're going to research and come back as part of the zoning amendment process, some sort of a plan for determining saturation points on the housing that has a regional perspective, that provides a regional perspective.
Point B actually in the document.
Pardon me?
That research is going to be done on saturation, you know, included in the document, that's part of our plan.
Well, I was recommending that we do that as part of the zoning changes.
Put the details in there in your code, but talk about that we're going to do that in the plan.
I got you. Yes, we will do that. I'm not sure where we'll put it, but we will put it. Plan.
Wondering if it's under recommendation matrix, potentially adding in.
Oh, that might be a great place. Yeah, sure.
Where we're talking about create zoning overlay, conduct zoning audit, update zoning code and map. I'm struggling with my words too.
Yeah.
But more or less, I know Mr. Gokenauer and I talked about it. I think we're all generally on the same page. We don't want this to be done in a vacuum. We don't want to open the door to unregulated development of one type. That's not the point of this plan. And the point is to have a harmonious mixed use string of development. And we don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past where you drive down Cherry Street from McDonald's, Wendy's, Pizza Hut out of town and you have a disjointed zoning class of C2 industrial, steel building, some natural materials, major setbacks, all the way up and down a new parkway.
Mm-hmm. So I'm including something like, it's as a recommendation, require regional saturation analysis for all medium, high density, zoning requests. You know. I didn't get
To ensure there's a need and we haven't reached a tipping point on one type of development or another.
to ensure need. Okay.
But that should also be, go both ways. We also don't want the opposite.
Right.
Where the whole plan becomes commercial and there was no residential, unless that's what, one development did it all, but we want it both ways.
Okay.
Wonder if they sell a calculator for this.
All right. Residential and commercial. Yep.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the Sunbury Parkway plan with the recommended changes. Second by Mrs. Crawford. Discussion. Roll call.
Mayor St. John.
Yes.
Mrs. Crawford,
Yes.
Mr. Grumney,
Yes.
Mrs. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Soderman,
Yes.
Mr. Gokenhour.
No.
5 yeas, motion approved.
Great, thank you.
All right, we're in the visitor section. We have any visitors? Here. And we have we need a motion to approve the minutes from the June 24th meeting.
Make motion.
Got a motion by Mrs. Crawford.
Second.
Second by Mr. Grumney. Discussion. Roll call.
Mrs. Crawford,
Yes.
Mr. Grumney,
Yes.
Mr. Soderman,
Yes.
Mr. Gokenhour, Mrs. Miller,
Abstain.
Mayor St. John.
Yes.
5 yeas, motion approved.
Zoning report. Alex.
Thank you, Mayor. So we had 19 new zoning certificates this past month, 7 of which were new builds. We had a few decks, a few pools, a few solars mixed in there, 7 occupancy permits done, and then 10 other permits, including 2 variance approvals that we had at the BZA last week. And those new builds break down as follows: 5 for Rolling Hills, 1 for Price Ponds, 1 for Magnolia Park. This puts us significantly below last year for the month, but just below last year in total for the year. We're 104 this year, 106 from last year. Again, last year we did have a major project approved within, or a major project that got all their zoning certificates and new builds in July. So that describes that, or that's where that discrepancy comes from in there. And then aside, I believe that is all. Does anyone have any questions regarding zoning?
Questions on the report? Alex, I was going to ask you if you could add another version of this report. This one I don't think tells the whole story in terms of the number of housing units. I know this is looking at permits. I was wondering if we have one that would show new housing units that come online, specifically the DRK apartments that have been approved and they're nearing occupancy. From what I recall, you said that 35 last July.
Yes.
Was the number of buildings.
So that is, yes, the structures that were approved within the Ravines at Meadow Ridge, the DRK project. I can add that into, because we haven't, in the past, we haven't gotten many apartment complex units that come on. So I can make some edits and revise and get unit numbers total, which come in as well.
I was almost wondering if it's just a corresponding report, unless it's going to cause you a tremendous amount of work. Can you give it some thought?
Yeah, I can. I'll work something up and
maybe you and Alyssa can work some Excel magic.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, I appreciate it. Thank you. All right, we are on to discussion and new business. Mr. Gokenhour, Mr. Grumney,
No.
Mrs. Miller, no, Mr. Crawford, Mr. Stoddard. All right, we're on to next meeting, August 26th, 2024. We're looking for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Got a motion to adjourn, Mr. Grumney. Second by Mrs. Crawford. Roll call.
Mr. Grumney,
Yes.
Mrs. Crawford,
Yes.
Mr. Soderman,
Yes.
Mrs. Miller,
Yes.
Mayor St. John,
Yes.
Mr. Gokenhour.
Yes.
6 yeas, we are adjourned.